I wanted to talk about the studio a little bit. People like it, they've told me, when I peel back the curtain, okay? Show a little behind the scenes. They call it BTS, Jordan, in the trade. And after having built this studio over 5 years and getting it perfect, finally, to where everything works and it looks right, we're going to tear it all down next week and start over.
Pulling the Constellation.
We're pulling it. We're just tearing it to the studs. And part of it is just, there's just wires. Like walking through here, you have to be like a cat. You know, you have to kind of lift your leg because you will knock something over. This house was built in 1918. And I don't know if you guys are history buffs, but there was something else going on in 1918 that basically sucked all the copper to use for bullets out of the American ecosystem. So houses were built with aluminum wiring, which is notorious for catching on fire. And it's all aluminum wire up here. We've had burnouts. Half the plugs don't work. So that's the real reason. We have to tear the walls out and get the whole thing rewired. And while they're doing it, they're going to put some insulation in it so it's not breezy in here. Jordan, we're going to be out of the studio for about a month or two, but don't worry. I've set up a temporary studio downstairs in my living room.
Perfect.
I'm like,
we'll just use
scared.
That. Yeah, so that's probably more than y'all wanted to know, but we're always trying to improve things for you guys and for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you to BeerNet Radio, the podcast where all your dreams come true. We have a special guest today, but Jen, I think you wanted to talk about a little bit of news before we introduced our guest. So have at it.
Yeah, we had a lot of news, and it's only Tuesday. So, yesterday, news hit, big news. Hand family companies cannonballed, as we said, into California by announcing the acquisition of not one, but two giant craft and NA players, Stone Distributing and Classic Distributing. The Hand family companies created a subsidiary for these businesses in California called Sunset Distributing. And all in, the addition brings Hand family Coves to about 50 million cases, making them a gigantic wholesaler between their Lakeshore House in Illinois, Bluegrass, Bev in Kentucky, TriStar in Tennessee, and of course now Sunset. Stone and Classic, as we had written, have sort of notable recent histories. Of course, Stone was carved out of the 165, Stone Distributing was carved out of the 165 million deal for Stone, for Sapporo to buy Stone a couple of years ago. And Classic sold its legacy brands, which span from Molson Coors to Mark Anthony and Boston to Reyes around 2021. So there's a lot of moving parts to this deal. And another big notable extraneous thing, Harry's going to call me on the word extraneous. That's probably banned too.
No.
Is that there's also an August of 2023 alliance that's pertinent here because Stone Distributing was part of a handful of AB houses in California that were offering a statewide solution to new suppliers that was dubbed California Beverage Solution that Stone was part of. B can elaborate in a second, but so far as we know, obviously Sunset will continue on in this coalition. It's basically a way for them to be able to take new brands and spirits and that sort of thing in California in opposition to Reyes and that sort of thing, because notably in California, the branches cannot carry things like Los Sundays and Cutwater. And so this could be a workaround for AB wholesalers to be able to do that. And before I pass it off to you guys to offer more context on it, I'd point out that Classic and Stone are just craft and NA, but they actually have decent share to begin with. Maria Stipp, I was looking back in our coverage, and she told us back in 2022, and of course she was at the helm of Stone, that SDC had about a 10 share of the LA craft / FMB / seltzer dollar sales in LA XAOC, and more than 22 of SD XAOC dollar share in those segments. So, I know there's a lot more to this deal. I'll let you guys take it away.
I talked to JR briefly yesterday, and we talked about the possibility because this territory overlaps with the AB branches, and so I said, is this a play for the branches? And he was like, well, he didn't want to go on record. I could tell that it is, first of all, and second of all, but he made a point to say that this makes these companies way more profitable regardless if we get the AB brands. He goes, their share is so high, but they weren't making any money separately. Because remember, it's not how many cases you sell, it's how many cases you sell per account, which means market share. You can lose money and sell 10 million cases, right? It's got to be how many per account. And so by combining those companies, using the overlap to increase their leverage the drop size per account, that he says it's going to be a good deal. The second thing I wanted to point out is that JR was a pioneer in using non-bank financing in wholesalers. In fact, when he did that deal, was it 2016 in Chicago? I remember calling him and saying, "I can't believe the brewery approved this," because it was like private equity was involved, and before that, it was in the AB system, it was non-existent. So he's a risk taker, and I called him the
Elon Musk.
and I didn't, I hope people don't mean like in cost cutting I mean Elon Musk before Doge. I mean as a businessman, like the bets he made that all turned out very well when nobody thought they would. And that's kind of what he's willing to take the risk because he can see 10 years down the road and he sees around corners. And he is, I'm happy to announce that he is our first confirmed speaker for the summit in 2026 in January at the Hotel del Coronado.
Sweet. Do you think this is one of the rare deals where an AB distributor makes a move and they don't have to run it by AB at all?
He has run it by.
Okay.
So he's had conversations. I didn't get the sense that they were doing backflips over it.
Yeah.
But he says that I think the term he uses, they're coming around to his way of thinking, that it's better to have an AB guy in that slot than randos.
Yeah.
Like Stone, because at least they have a line of communication to them. And I have a feeling, I don't have any insider information. I have a feeling that AB might be motivated to get out of the branch business in California because I haven't seen it's not profitable. Okay.
Yeah.
They have too low a share and they're union. The cost of delivery in California is super high. The diesel prices are a good $1 more a gallon. I mean, there's just a lot of reasons, but do they want those money-losing assets on their books? I mean, it's a balance sheet issue. It's not producing cash flow, and it's just assets sitting on their books. It's the same reason why Coke decided to get out of the bottling network system, 5 and 10 years ago. Pepsi's gone the other route, but I wonder what AB's thinking is. JR is perfectly set up to do that deal if AB does decide to get rid of their branches. So that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah. And would he really create a subsidiary, Sunset, right, to go over those two if he weren't trying to do more in California? I don't think it would be worth it to him to enter California with just those, right? Maybe I'm
Plus
wrong.
He has a non-banking partner, who's in it for the big deals, not for piddly ass shit.
Well, if AB were to divest of those branches, I mean, is California pretty much conquered? I mean,
yeah.
What else is left out there?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of independent AB distributors still. I mean, I don't know his ambitions. I don't know if he wants to be the Reyes of the AB system and just start plucking them off, over time. But
yeah, the red Reyes. There is one thing I wanted to add, and then I know Bianca got to talk to Brian Freed with Stone Distributing Company, who theoretically, would stay on because they did say they were going to keep the people. But I just wanted to add, we keep talking about in terms of Reyes, that Reyes is statewide, Reyes is statewide. I was looking at the map and they are, but let's not forget Valley-wide.
Right.
We always forget about them. They're a giant share. I think they're based in Fresno, so pretty smack dab in the middle of the state, but they've got like 60, 70 share in their market, and they are a giant Constellation Molson Coors wholesaler. So just wanted to remind everybody of that.
Did Reyes buy that Compton distributor?
I didn't know about Compton.
Beauchamp?
Yeah, Beauchamp.
They took Constellation from them.
Is Beauchamp still there?
I think they might be.
Just squeaking it out, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
Squeaking one out. So I got to talk to Brian yesterday, and to backtrack a little bit, when Jen had cited some of their share stats in LA, when I talked to him back in 2023, about a year after they had been cycling as an independent entity outside of Stone, outside of the Sapporo deal, he said they were still growing and they saw a 3% share increase in 2023 in SoCal, and they were accounting for nearly a fourth of craft dollar sales in SoCal. And at the time, they were carrying 36 suppliers and 47 brands. And he said, they had more interest than ever from suppliers wanting to join on. And it sounds like that growth has continued. He said last year they sold through 5.4 million cases, saw some craft stabilization and significant growth in FMB, RTD, and non-alc, which is kind of, the prize of this deal with Classic and SDC. And he did confirm, because we weren't sure yesterday afternoon, that Sunset will be joining the California Beverage Solution, which is made up of several distributors in the state. And he said that was a great move, seemed excited about it, and then also excited of what Hand family companies will actually bring to that, their experience, and how that might support the group.
Yeah. Because they're very admired, the Hand, especially in Tennessee and Kentucky, where they've been forever and they have a really high share. And
I haven't heard of many instances, but I was talking to Gambrinus a couple weeks ago while working on this Trumer story, and they told me that they actually went the opposite way and moved from Reyes to AB. And he's like, that's nothing against Reyes. We are partners with Reyes in many other parts of the country, but in this particular market, it was best for the brand. So it'll be interesting to see if other people start to make moves like that now that there is that statewide solution beyond Reyes.
JR definitely said that he anticipates getting more brands. That was, not just new brands.
Yeah.
So
spirits brands, I'm sure, right? I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like, how would it go, and especially with RNDC, as we have been talking about losing brands left and right. Let's say theoretically RNDC goes under, then is Cutwater up for grabs, Cutwater and Los Sundays, and can go through this CBS anchored by
RNDC
Fresno.
doesn't have to go under.
Well, that makes it easier.
They can just take it from them. There's no franchise law.
Right.
For spirits. Hell, there's no franchise law for beer in California.
Yeah. And yet somehow, the branch can't have spirits, though. We're going to draw the line there. But anyway.
Well, no, they can't. Yeah, because they have a brewer's permit. You can't have a brewer's permit and have a Class C or whatever it's called, spirits distributorship. For some reason, you can with beer. It's so weird that they're so differently regulated. I'm not even talking about the state. I'm talking about the TTB federal level. Spirits is treated so much differently than malt beverage. It has to be malt or sugar based, have a whole different set of regulations.
Interesting. Well, shall we move along briefly to the next couple of items? Yeah, we had more doom and gloom. Bump put out a letter. That was more bad news. I'll just give you the Cliff's Notes because it's basically more of what we've been talking about. Beers growers are slowing. And then he was kind of showing how year-to-date trends have gone and comparing them to 2024. The problem is they've decelerated the last 4 weeks. And if 2025 goes like 2024, they're about to fall off a cliff, which ain't great. But here's the smoking gun. I dug in a little bit more on his note and asked him a couple follow-ups because he had mentioned in passing that beer lost some shelf space, even though there were some winners in the category, of course. But he told me beer lost about 4% of the shelf space across the country, mostly to RTD spirits and D9 beverages for spring resets. Most losses came from craft, hard seltzer, and some duplicate American domestic and cider brands. And then we finally, on a separate note, just got the new scan data for the latest week in from Circana. And that kind of smooths over the year ago St. Pat's Day comp and brings, thankfully, for the 2-week period, Modelo trends to flat. Let's see, Michelob bounced back, thankfully, because it had been, getting close to flat too, but it was up 6% for the 2 weeks, and then White Claw up 2%. Guinness was only down 2%, because remember, in the prior week for St. Pat's Day, it had been down double digits, which is really scary. For the single week, latest week, it was up 22%. So for the 2-week period, again, just about flat. But, so a bounce back in the latest week that actually included the actual St. Patrick's Day, but not necessarily fantastic for beer. I think beer overall was flat for the latest week. So
what day was St. Patrick's Day this year?
Monday.
On a Monday.
What was it last year?
Sunday.
Oh, well, There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But still, with the 2-week, 2-week data should have... that doesn't account for Sunday versus Monday, but still, some smoothing out and still not great. Anyway, hopefully, and we're about to get into this with Bill, but hopefully some have speculated that once we get over the uncertainty of Tariff Day tomorrow, right? Is it tomorrow? I forget. Liberation Day. Then things, at least we'll know where we stand and there'll be a little more certainty in the market. And that should be good for, buying trends in general, but we will see.
Good for domestic. I'm just glad that I have a president that's going to liberate me from Canadian aluminum. I am tired of getting buried in Canadian aluminum and maple syrup. No more. Anyway, I tease. So, Jen, do you want to introduce our esteemed guest?
Yes.
I like it that y'all are in separate rooms. That's cool.
Well, I mean, we can't exactly be in the same room.
Well,
we did
that's
talk
true.
about it, though. We talked about having like a cool loop, like he's behind me, and then Anyway, today we have Bill Kirk. Bill is a managing director at Roth, covering beverages, retailers, and cannabis. And he's been covering the space for about 15 years. And that's actually how we met in Miami when he told me his name was Esteban. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
I remember that day. We were at the Fontainebleau, right?
We were. And in all of those 15 years, I've yet to see an April Fool's edition. Every April Fool's Day, I wake up hoping to see a BBD April Fool's Day edition, and I don't think I've seen one. How come?
No.
Because we're
Mark
busy,
Brown
Bill.
used to do that. Do y'all remember Mark Brown used to do that? And he'd say like Sazerac's going to come in the carcass of a squirrel, and people would repeat it. And I'm like, come on, guys. Come on.
And then I think Brewdog actually did it.
Yeah,
So-
Brewdog did it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was riffing off that. Yeah.
Jen, you used to do some in CBD, and they were pretty good.
Yeah, it was fun. Okay, first of all, I feel like we had more time back then. And secondly, Jordan, we've talked about this. You can't make it up anymore. Like,
No.
stuff has gotten so crazy. Like, I literally got through a gag newsletter today. It took me half of the newsletter to realize, oh, this is a joke. Like, they said that, like, yes, that Doge was taking over the TTB, and that Big Balls was writing the alcohol warning labels now.
I got through half of it too. I admit that it was clickbait title.
Right,
I'm just
exactly.
going to change warning labels on alcohol. Well done, Tom. My nemesis. If you're watching.
If you're watching from behind enemy lines. Well, should I kick it off with Bill, or do y'all want to have Adam first?
No, I think you should go. And
All right.
shall you make a disclosure up front?
Oh, do you have any disclosures, Bill?
No, we're good. No disclosures. Everything I say, I've written about. I'm not going to give you guys anything new, and I'm not going to make any shit up.
All right. No forward-looking statements.
Keep
But
it real.
no, what I was getting at is that y'all are married.
Oh,
So
well, we
not
talked
everybody
about
knows
how we
who we are.
met. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we're married. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why we're in the same house. And
Right. Well, that makes sense then.
And
all right.
Whenever we have a beer debate that we can't kind of settle amongst ourselves, we sit the kids down and let them be the tribunal to the ultimate arbiter of who's right.
Well, you need to film that for sure. And I just want to quickly say that the day y'all met, funny enough, speaking of J.R. Hand, was the day that JR and I went out and saw 50 Cent and met him in the bar, and we stayed out till like 4 a.m. And it was probably the last time I've raged like that.
Yeah,
So.
I remember that.
Never
Never
made
made
it go
15
out,
years ago.
Lori.
Woo! 50. Oh, Fitty.
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 If you're watching.
If you're watching.
You're definitely watching.
Well, now that John Daly's been on the pad, you never know who's watching.
Mhm.
It's true.
Celebrities.
That's true. I'm going to
Yes.
send it to my mother-in-law.
Strong follow-up guest you guys have for this edition.
How do you top
You're
John
the
Daly?
best, bro.
All right. Well, we're talking about Liberation Day, right? And in the beer space, all eyes are on Constellation because of that, right? So how much of a threat to their business, the health of their business, could these tariffs actually be, whether they materialize or not, right? Because even if they don't materialize, that could have an effect.
Yeah, that we're even asking that question is exactly the problem, because no one knows. They don't know. I don't know. We don't know. It's really hard to plan for, right? So there's only so much they could do ahead of time. Beer obviously doesn't have the shelf life that liquor has, so you can't really play the inventory games. Even some liquor companies in international markets, right? They own their distribution in some international markets. So go ahead, send them a whole bunch of whiskey before the European Union tariffs go on. All right, they can handle it and they own it. So you can play inventory games in some of the other categories. Can't really do it in beer. So they're watching it and waiting like us, and don't necessarily have a great way to build the contingency plan. I mean, we can see in the ordering data from the BPI that Lester puts out, there hasn't been inventory build of Mexican imports ahead of potential tariffs. So it's kind of wait and see. One thing I think is interesting, and maybe people are overly punitive when they think about Constellation. They have costs in the US, right? The inbound freight to the distributors, or inbound freight to their warehouses, outbound to the distributors, that's all in their cost of goods sold. So that's not like a part of the dollar value that the tariff would be applied to. The tariff value is lower than their cost of goods sold. So it's not a 25% increase on their entire cost profile. It's a 25% increase on part of their cost profile, if that helps.
Could they tanker it here and can it here?
I don't know if the decree allows for that. I think it's finished product. I think they're allowed to brew technically wherever Anheuser-Busch brews Modelo and Corona. So if Anheuser-Busch opened a Corona Modelo plant somewhere around the world, which I do think they have one in China now, but if Anheuser-Busch opened one, then Constellation could follow. But until that happens, until Anheuser-Busch does things not in Mexico, Constellation can't do things not in Mexico.
That's too bad.
Yeah. And I had forgotten, thank you for reminding me about the dismal BPI at 33 that came in. And that is just crazy.
And people forget about the consent decree. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like Constellation is brewing in Mexico to save money. They're doing it because they have to. The federal government, the courts have told them they have to do it for a period of time. And so, there's no way for them to really massage. And like you said, Bill, they can't really build that much inventory. I know the EU has been France has been shipping wine here like they've never shipped it before. Their numbers are going to be way up, but how much they sell through, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be as if Diageo didn't already have an inventory problem, meaning too much.
Well, and if it's mostly Jack Daniels, but the American whiskeys going to Europe, if they don't ultimately get sold there, right? If consumption's down in Europe, we get more whiskey in the United States. It adds to that extra supply problem of whiskey domestically. Wonderful if you're a consumer and you've been looking for rare whiskeys or unique whiskeys, but really hard to grow your profitability when there's just too much whiskey laying around.
That's a great point. Because I did a segment on Fox News, which I don't think ever aired, but we were making the point, because I was on with a whiskey guy, and we were making the point that if these tariffs stick, the price of whiskey will probably go down while the price of beer goes up. And so that's another hit on demand, because if Constellation doesn't eat the whole thing and they do take pricing, I guess AB and Molson Coors would kind of be smart to follow. I don't know. Maybe they'll take the share.
Yeah, I mean, they've been slow. Everybody's been slow to take pricing this spring. You've written about it. Jen, you've written about it too. I don't know if the hesitation, some of what Bump was talking about, is like if beer is going to be losing 4% of its shelf space here in the spring, maybe you don't want to be the one leading heavily on price, right? Like, so you're coming from a position where beer is not getting much pricing to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I didn't really note this, going back to Bump's thing and Spirits competitive pricing. Spirits has not seen quite the as bad trends as beer has. Spirits has held up a little bit better. So, which always surprises me. It's like, with all of this rhetoric about how bad Bev-Alc is for you right now, right? Like, you would think that spirits, which is the most concentrated form of ethanol, would be doing worse, but that's not at all what's happening. So anyway, that's a little bit of a
no. And I would say that certain vodka brands will benefit from this. A lot of vodka is made here, Tito's being the main one. So it will be a wash in whiskey for sure. We do know that. And probably some wine too.
What else? Should we move on for Constellation, or any other Constellation thoughts?
I mean, Harry, you just mentioned wine. If the France wine product has that tariff on it, domestic wine, right? Forget the inventory load that France may be trying now, but once that's over, domestic wine sits very favorably, and that's an asset that has been rumored to be for sale for Constellation. So we might be approaching a day where Constellation's beer only or malt only, right? Wine and spirits might be gone, and that kind of protectionist tariff on wine from France works really well for if you're if you're growing grapes in California and Rochester.
Yeah.
Right. Especially the grapes in Rochester, because who doesn't love just a big cold bottle of Richard's Wild Irish Rose after dinner? Which let's not forget was Constellation's original product. That was their dance card to get into this game. And the reason it's called Richard's Wild Irish Rose is because of Richard Sands. It was named
I was just
after
going to
him.
ask if that was why or if
Yeah.
it was a coincidence. That's so funny.
Yeah, when he was a baby, his father and they sold the shit. It was a cheap, it was a cheap fortified wine that mostly winos drank. Nobody uses the term wino anymore. Like a guy sitting on the corner with a bag. You'd call him a wino because they were drinking wine.
Yeah. Like all the Skid Row guys used to drink wine. It was like the tough thing to drink back in the day.
Right,
Yeah.
Mad Dog, Thunderbird. What's the price? $1 twice.
Let's bring it back. Let's bring
Bring
it
it
back.
back.
Bring it back. Well, okay. What else? Let's see. How about you also cover Molson Coors in Boston? What kind of summer do you think they're going to have? Because I think we've talked about it here on the show before. Molson Coors is about to get a good comp, right? Because they're cycling some tough times. So what's your outlook for them?
Yeah, so Molson Coors, it's a lot about getting more productive with what they're doing. So when they were doing all that extra shipping, when Bud Light had its issues and it all went to Miller Lite and Coors Light, they were shipping from whatever brewery they could produce it, right? That demand was a surprise, and maybe even the stickiness of the shift was a surprise. So they were brewing it and shipping it in maybe not the most efficient locations. They just had to get it done. And so now, even though not all that volume has stayed, they can put it into the right locations. They can put it closest to the distributors who need it rather than having all those extra miles. So I think you're in a point in time where Molson Coors is getting more efficient with a little bit less volume. But going back to Bump's conversation about the spring resets, it sounds like they've held shelf space. So if Molson Coors held shelf space and beer as a total got smaller, that's a net win for the Molson Coors portfolio on relative shelf space.
So what you're saying is, Bill, is because now they're right sized or whatever, because it is complex, right? These brands don't all sell in the same regions. There's no U.S. beer market. There's the Midwest, there's the Great Lakes, there's and they can smooth out their shipping costs and maybe bring their COGS down per barrel.
That's exactly right. And that because I don't even know their 10 locations or 9 locations that well, but when that demand hit, they just had to get it done. Right? They weren't planning for it. And so whatever brewery had the excess capacity to do it, and they didn't have a ton of excess capacity anymore because they had already sold Irwindale at that point. So they didn't have a ton of excess. It was just whatever location could pump out the cases, that's where it was made. And, to hell with the miles, we got to make the beer.
Yeah, they're FedExing beer across the country.
No, they're Uber Eats in it. Get it done. Nice.
That's interesting.
Okay.
I hadn't thought of that, but that makes sense. And so, we don't have always a lot of good news about Molson Coors. So let's take a lap. They're set to maybe do something this year.
We'll
Well,
see.
it's the 50-year anniversary for Miller Lite, right?
Yeah, that too.
So
Yeah, and I think they
don't
have
know
good
what kind of
programming
programming
behind
they
that.
have planned, but maybe you guys do.
I think they have good programming behind it, right, Jordan?
Yeah. They have a campaign coming that kind of kicked off with Christopher Walken. We don't know much more about what they have in store, but big celebration planned for this year. And they still have Banquet going strong. Banquet is their workhorse right now. So outside of that, trends are tough, but
Yeah.
All right. How about Boston? Because we've been talking a ton about Sun Cruiser, but aside from Sun Cruiser, what else does Boston have going, or for it or against it?
I'm gonna go right at Sun Cruiser.
Sun Cruiser down.
But here's the thing. So Sun Cruiser, in my world, it's hard to see Sun Cruiser because Nielsen or Circana or whatever, they don't pick up
Liquor.
some of the states that Sun Cruiser launched in at first. They don't pick up those states that well.
Massachusetts, New Jersey.
Yeah.
And the even if they do have okay coverage of the state, it's liquor based, so it doesn't scan as well because it's liquor channels. So
Right. And there's no chains up there. There's Massachusetts, I don't think there's certain states where you can't even have a liquor store chain. So They don't scan.
Exactly. And so I think it's maybe not catching you guys by surprise, but I think it's going to catch a lot of my counterparts by surprise, a lot of investors by surprise, because they open up that weekly file, right? Sunday night, Monday morning, they open up the weekly file and Sun Cruiser doesn't pop out, right? It doesn't pop out to them. So we need to lean on you, the people you know, to get an advantage and thinking about what Sun Cruiser can be. And so it's less than 1% of sales in 2024. It's adding national distribution right now, shipping at the end of 1Q, starting to sell through in 2Q. And it could be 4 or 5 points to the total company this year. And so going from 1 to 4 or 5 is a nice way to offset Truly declines. It's a nice way to complement Twisted Tea growth. And so I do think Sun Cruiser's the biggest kind of variable or the surprise for at least folks like us who don't see it
sleeper,
or don't look hard enough.
Well, Bill, I mean, wouldn't you agree that that's kind of perfectly in Boston Beer's competency, being a fast follower, seeing what Clem has done at Surfside and hell, John Daly is doing, I mean, and just randos. What's the guy that we're having on the podcast in the Midwest?
Oh, Carbless, Adam Kroner.
Yeah, Carbless. So wouldn't you agree that that's really Boston's wheelhouse because there's just have such a great sales staff?
I think that's completely right. I mean, they did it a little bit with cider even, right? I mean, Woodchuck, and then here comes Angry Orchard. And they had tried other brands, right? They had tried Hardcore, kind of maybe like they've tried other kind of tea brands that haven't worked as well as Sun Cruiser. They're obviously quick on seltzer, right? What was the one that AB bought that they turned into Bon and Viv?
Oh my God, Spike Seltzer.
They had the name.
Yeah, and then Truly comes after it. Yeah, so I think that's completely right. Even when the IPAs started hitting, Rebel came quickly after with a good product. So it is completely in their wheelhouse. And Harry, I think you nailed it. It's their sales force is quite big for the organization. So when they get something that looks like it's working, they can be in a lot of places really, really quickly. And that's how they try to catch up to Surfside is they outsell them. They hand sell them now is their plan.
There's a ton of ads in San Diego for it.
I saw some in the airport in Phoenix recently. They're making that push now, and they said it was incremental, wasn't taking for Twisted Tea. Hard to believe a little bit, but Bump went and said the same thing. And so there's a little confirmation of it's not just taking from Twisted Tea; it's something incremental and additional. And I think that's the type of thing they need. They've been waiting for the hit for a while.
To me, it's totally a different drinker. When I think of Twisted Tea, I think of NASCAR. When I think of Sun Cruiser, I think of more of like, for some reason, tea and lemonade always do well in the Northeast first. Like that's where Mike's was born, in Massachusetts, and then it kind of the Southeast does, and then the Midwest. Curiously enough, those things don't do great in California, which is maybe one reason why AB's not launching skimmers there, although maybe they're not launching it there because they can't distribute it themselves.
Yeah, that's probably why.
Yeah. So.
We'll see. Stay tuned.
Bill, what do you make of Truly now that White Claw has, stabilized, is growing, and Truly is still stuck in the mud, sort of?
Yeah. I mean, seltzer's been kind of like that Bubba Gump shrimp boat. All right, like it had a big storm comes through, all the shrimp boats get taken out, and White Claw's left to catch all the shrimp. Right, so it's Forrest Gump, White Claw catching all the shrimp. And so
what a great analogy.
I was like, where's he going with this?
You could see me. I was trying to put it together. I was like, all right, I think we can get here.
I love it. You brought it home. Anyway, continue.
But Truly still has a boat, at least. Right? They were not washed ashore. They're taking their kind of biggest, boldest flavors, getting rid of them because they weren't doing much. They're going more light, refreshing, which is kind of how seltzer started. And seltzer is losing shelf space this spring. And again, I mean, we're going to Bump because he's got a lot of great content this time of year too. Is seltzer losing shelf space? Truly kept shelf space. So again, relative basis, Truly has more shelf space as seltzer in 2025 than they had in 2024 because the long tails gotten pruned more than they have.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interesting. Do you think we see a world in 2 years where A, truly still around, and B, it may actually be growing a little bit just because it had, gotten so right sized that it's finally time to build up again?
I think it probably stays in decline. I think it probably continues to decline. I think a lot of these like adjacent categories aren't really categories as much as they are brands that people tried to copy, right?
Mhm.
Like there is no lemonade category, it's just Mike's. There really isn't a malt-based tea category, it's just Twisted Tea. There really isn't a malt-based seltzer category, it's just True, or it's just White Claw,
White Claw. Yeah.
right? So
Interesting.
I don't think these are necessarily segments that are going to have a lot of players. 1 to 2 truly would be number 2 if there are, and end up being 2. But a lot of these beer adjacent segments or whatever you want to call them ended up just being one brand, really.
Yeah.
And so that's the analogous fate that I think Truly has and Seltzer has in favor of White Claw.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. It's so true. I mean, those are just one brand categories. I mean, like Mick Ultra is a famous example
Yeah.
of that. The only domestic super premium brand that's really made it. I'm sorry, I meant American super premium. Man,
I know. You're going to
My
get
friends at
vaporized
AB.
by the AB machine.
I've been getting emails. I hear you, folks. I hear you.
Let's move to cannabis because Bill is one of the few analysts that covers cannabis. And I'm curious. Obviously, again, since we're talking about Bump, and by the way, part of the reason Bill's talking about Bump so much too is that he had a call with Bump last week with investors. I hope I can say that. I think I can. Anyway, talking about D9, and D9 is, according to Bump, and some others that we've talked to, taking shelf space from beer. Now, it's hard to quantify where and exactly how much. But my question for you, Bill, is do you think more traditional cannabis companies will take the whole if you can't beat them, join them route and launch D9 products? Because we've seen that obviously with Tillray, who you cover. And we've seen it with, I think, Wana Brands, which I think is a subsidiary of Canopy USA, just in gummies. But anyway, like, what's going on there?
Yeah, Curaleaf has too, right? Primarily THC, but doing Delta 9 beverages as well. So a lot of it. But here's the problem. There's too many brands. And unlike some of those other categories that we talked about that did also see eventually too many brands, right? Too many brands in tea, too many brands in seltzer. All these too many brands in D9 has happened before we've even seen that if there's demand for it. Like I get people are excited, but it's not like, wow, look at this amazing category and let's all go chase it. They're in a position that these D9 producers are like, we're stuck. THC is stuck. There's no new states. There's no federal change. We are in a tricky spot. What can we do to try to grow and circumvent the rules? And it's not like they're addressing some demand that's calling for this product. They're creating a product in hopes there is demand for it. And that's a lot harder. That's a lot harder to be a new entrant. And if you're these cannabis companies, who do you call? You don't. If you want to get through a beer network, do you even know who to call in what market or how to find the right person or hell, who the distributors are in some of these markets? You don't know those people. And that's an advantage that Tillray, that Jen, that you mentioned that Tillray does have. They at least know who to call. They already talked to them and know them. They can get somebody to pick up the phone and have this conversation. All these other cannabis brands out there trying D9. I don't know how they can get anybody's attention right now.
That's a good point. It's very tough to scale also because, you don't drink really more than one or two. So that's a scale issue right there. But also I'm curious, is Tilray going to be delisted? Like, are they going to do a reverse stock split or what's going to go on there?
They'll have to do likely a reverse split. So you have, and I don't forget exactly the rules, but you have a certain number of days under $1. So it'd be a reverse split to address it. And so no, they won't ultimately be delisted, but they'll need to do something.
Yeah. And going back to D9, I was thinking about this the other day, but how do you stick out in that category? Because everything's 5 milligram, 10 milligram. They all taste the same. It's almost kind of like energy where there's really no way there's no like craft element to it or local element to it. Come here and try this. It's just all the same thing with all the same ingredients. I don't know how that expands into
I know
another
how.
state. Let's hear it.
You put super creatine in it.
Yes.
Yeah, you get somebody like Jack Watt
Yeah.
behind it.
I think you're right, Jordan. There's no margin if there's no brand, right? Like no one makes money in a commoditized business. So brands need to develop, and there isn't much to differentiate them. I think the local thing they're going to try. They're going to try to do that local thing, but again, to Harry's point, that doesn't scale. And so the people who will sell the most of it are the people who can actually go and get some placements, right? If all the brands are very similar, then it's whoever can has the best relationships, I guess. And it's going to be a tough area to make money.
If you were getting into that business, would you want to be a brand or would you try to be like a co-packer and say, I'm open for business for whoever?
Ooh, I'd rather be a brand using a co-packer. Whoever's got hard assets for on the ground for D9, they have a lot of risk that their business goes away immediately, right? Like any day, D9, the farm bill could change, right? Or the state's treatment of Delta 9 can change, and your assets that are being used to brew are can't be used for that anymore.
And
At
they
least if you're a
can't be
brand
moved.
using a co-packer, you pre-sell all your product, you don't have that much risk, I guess. But whoever's using physical capital has that risk of this might not be around.
Yeah.
Well, especially like you create all these assets in like Florida, and then it's illegal in Florida, and you're stuck with you can't just throw it on an 18 wheeler and move it to Minnesota.
So there was a time, and this goes back, Acreage, who Canopy USA now owns, but Acreage was flirting with that idea because they wanted to make THC beverages, but they couldn't scale it. So they were flirting with the idea of mobile production. So that if they're allowed to do it in California, keep the production in California, put it on an 18 wheeler and take it to Chicago and then make your product in Chicago. So they actually toyed with that idea. It never happened, but they at one point they said they were going to do exactly that.
Wow. Wow.
That's interesting.
I was just joking.
Yeah. Well, I think it shows how tough of a spot that they're in, right? That they would even have to consider that.
Right.
We know how long it takes to set up a brewery. It doesn't wheel up and it's ready to go. How long did Constellation's expansion at Piedras Negras take? It took
Yeah.
3 years or whatever it
Yeah.
took.
And do we have a sense of what the market is dollar wise? Because I got asked this morning by somebody, and I was like, well, as far as I can see, it's anywhere from 20 million to 1.2 billion. So somewhere in
It's a
between
small
there.
range. Yeah.
I don't have a good sizing for D9. I'm deficient there, I guess. I
Yeah.
probably should have an answer for that, but
Well, I don't either, and it's my job
Yeah.
too, Bill. And because there's no information out there, like you
Right.
said, it doesn't scan.
It's hard to track.
There's a lot of on premise.
Yeah.
It's just
There-
it's sold under the radar.
Yeah, there was a study a couple of years ago that sized up the whole entire cannabinoid market for hemp, CBD, hemp-derived Delta 9, and I think it was 23 billion in the US.
Yeah.
But that includes a lot of extra stuff. So
Yeah.
Yeah, not just drinks. That's everything. Yeah. Yeah. Do we have, and again, we should know this because we should be able to see something that tracks it, but I think we're a long way off of that. But do you get any sense of how Tillray's D9 products are tracking? I mean, they just launched and are launching.
No, I don't have it yet, but I would say they have distributor relationships that everybody else wishes they had, at least among the D9 folks, that wish they would have. And they also have that pub system. So all those little pubs are a good place to put D9 in. All right, like locally, that kind of fits. I could see why a D9 from 10 barrel, I don't even know if they have one, but like I could see why a D9 at 10 barrel would do better than someone else's D9 trying to sell in Bend, Oregon, right? So I don't, but I do think that pub system is an advantage, and I think the distributor relationships are an advantage.
I also
So-
think that D9 overlaps well with craft beer.
Yeah.
Like it could be, if we can get it straightened out, it might save some of these guys.
yeah.
I mean, it has in Minnesota.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Exactly. Good point.
And then on Tilray, Bill, do you see them striking another deal come August, fall? Can they keep it rolling?
What's coming next?
People are going to keep calling them. So Irwin, who runs Tillray, Irwin Simon, his kind of playbook when he was at Hain Celestial was we have a network that goes through United Natural Foods into Whole Foods. And so we can buy these small brands through M&A, buy these brands, put them in our system via UNFI and then Whole Foods, and make them way bigger than they are today. Right. So it was just leveraging their network with brands who didn't have access to that network. And that was extremely successful for him. He did really, really well with it. And then it got a little harder when Hain got really big, right? It was harder to find things that could move the needle. So that's what the attempt is here. The problem is the brands already have access to the network. The network isn't unique for Tillray, right? It's much bigger than Tillray. That network was unique for Irwin at Hain Celestial. So they're trying a very similar playbook, but they're trying it without having a network unique to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And and in fact they have AB and Molson Coors wholesalers, and that can be a little bit of a mess, right? Like there's a little bit of an overlap there, and
But to answer the question, I'd expect him to keep going. I mean, I mean that's what he did. Basically, his time at Hain Celestial, and it worked. And so I think he's trying to replicate it at Tilray.
Interesting. Can we think of anything that's left to sell? I mean, from the big guy. I mean, AB's keeping Wicked Weed, so that's not up for grabs.
I mean,
there must be. What's Monster doing?
Yeah,
What's Canarchy? Or it's not called Canarchy anymore. But what's
Monster
that
Brewing
doing?
Co.
Yeah.
Monster Brewing Co.
you never know if Heineken wants to keep holding on to Lagunitas.
Right. True. That would be the
No.
big one. That's true. That's the one. So
I would
we'll
hold
see.
on to it if I were them, though, because
Yeah.
if this thing does, let's just say in 5 years they figure out that D9's not going to make you have psychosis, like Dan Patrick says,
Psychosis.
and it's pretty
Psychosis.
safe, and they're like, okay, let's legalize it. Like Lagunitas would be a perfect
Yeah.
jumping off
Yeah.
point for them for that.
They have a cannabis beverage brand, not a D9
that's right.
brand. So
Yeah.
it's sold in dispensaries.
Mhm.
Yeah, they probably sell. I mean, maybe 100 cases a week. So I mean, it can only go up. I'm just kidding. They do not sell 100 cases a week. Way high. I tease Heineken. I love you.
Yes, we do.
I wanted to ask, I think you are probably the best person in the business covering BPI. The Captain, you have a great name for it and you have all the historicals. Is there anything from the latest, ones this month, January, February, March, that you think maybe people are missing or something that has surprised you from it? I know import's not expanding, of course, but
Yeah. The seltzer FMB is outperforming total beer, and that has a lot of problem children in it, right? That has seltzer ordering that's definitely negative on the whole. So that's an area of excitement. The one to watch, and I think might segue to a broader economic conversation, but the one to watch is that below premium, right? I love that data for it is like an economic indicator. Like when below premium is outperforming total beer, people are worried, and it's Busch Light and it's Natural Light and maybe Keystone Light too. But that's like a really good economic indicator because people don't really want to switch beer brands. If they're at Busch Light, they're fine being there, but people don't want to switch into them unless they have to. So when the economic or the economy brands or below premium, whatever you want to call them, when those pick up, which they have, that's usually a signal that there's something bigger than beer going on.
Yeah.
I mean,
And-
you just see it in C-store traffic. That's another great indicator, I think, and it's down. And, Banquet, let's not forget Banquet or Pabst or Lone Star, and they're all doing pretty well. Easy comps, but whatever.
Yeah, and we talked about consumer confidence reaching new lows. That was the news the last couple of weeks. So, Bill, you cover retailers, right? How are they feeling? What are they saying on their earnings calls about the consumer, about what they're doing?
So they enjoy that like restaurant substitution. So when there's that stress out there, people maybe eat out a little bit less and they switch to grocery or switch to a regular food retailer. And Costco's even said it. So Costco saw like a pickup in their like frozen entrees. And they think that's people leaving restaurants and eating at home just, a little bit more than they normally would. So they have that kind of channel shift to their benefit. The retailers also have like in-store substitution, right? They all offer private label. They have, different price tiers within their store. So even if there is like weakness, usually they can keep people in their store with just some other offering. So they're in an okay spot to handle it. Where it gets a little trickier for the retailers is if food inflation starts picking up. And it has a little bit. So food inflation picks up. You and I, we don't want to pay more, right? We're more sensitive to that, or consumers are more sensitive to that than they maybe normally are. And so that's the tricky spot the retailers are in. If food inflation's picking up for them on the input side, can they really pass it through? Can they really get it through to the consumer? Is the consumer going to take that inflation? And that is where the retailers are in a trickier spot. So like they benefit from channel, they benefit maybe even from a trade down into private label, but good luck getting that inflation through. Restaurants, even worse. They have the same food inflation. Their traffic's worse. It's down. They have labor issues on top of it, and they have to figure out a way to get food inflation through. So it's not a good environment for food inflation, and it's worst for restaurants.
I've read this morning that Kroger and Albertsons are suing to maybe take another bite at the apple. Do you have any insight on that?
I actually didn't see that one. So that's interesting because they're definitely suing each other. So the day the merger was blocked, Albertsons sued Kroger that day.
Mhm.
And then they claimed Kroger was trying to undermine the process, and that's why it got blocked. Kroger was actually actively working against it, and then Kroger countersued and responded like last week, I think it was. Basically said no, it was Albertsons working against us behind the scenes, and we wanted to do the merger. And so they're fighting. The lawyers, as always, the lawyers are winning. Collectively, these two companies are at like 1.5 billion in lawyer fees to have done nothing.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Give me that
Unbelievable.
money. Yeah.
I know, and
Just to push paper.
it's amazing how much has been spent. But I don't know what the outcome is. The reason Kroger wanted Albertsons in the first place is to catch up to Walmart. Walmart is doing things that smaller retailers, even large retailers, but smaller than Walmart retailers can't replicate.
And that's
Right.
just supply chain, right?
It's
Yeah.
supply chain. It's automation in the warehouses. It's that digital network. So Walmart.com is a huge third-party ecosystem right now. Walmart is closing in is the wrong phrase, but Walmart's catching up to Amazon in building a third-party seller marketplace. And all those eyeballs going to Walmart.com, they don't care that they might not like shopping in a Walmart store.
Yeah.
They see Walmart.com, they get to have the value. They don't have to go in the store, and they get the logistics prowess. And no other retailer, Amazon, yes, but no other kind of brick and mortar traditional Walmart competitor can offer it.
Okay, cool. I know Bill has to jump in 1 minute. So last quick question. Give us some reasons for category hope.
I like this. Okay. So we all know that giant list of things that's like hurting beer, right? Like the list gets bigger every day. All these things are problems in beer. But like how many of them are like that new? Like how many of them are really new? Because if you remember when we were closing out 2024, beer was relatively normal. I mean, it was much better than it has been in 2025. So like what's changed in 2025 from 2024? Like we say cannabis is a problem. That's not new to 2025. Weight loss drugs, not new to 2025. Sports gambling, not new. Even younger people like slow to enter the category. That's not new to 2025. So I think the new thing has really just been the administration change. That's the difference between 2025 and late 2024. The plans or the proposals and the policies, they've just disrupted a large group of beer consumers. And that group, people don't like change. Change breaks whatever habits they had, but that's the reason beer is going to get better. Here, consumers ultimately adapt. Whatever change they get hit with, consumers adapt to change. And so even if things stay as it is, the shock of it's gone, right? The shock is what breaks habits. So even if things stay as they are, if there's no more additional shock, the beer consumer comes back. Just go back to any giant shock over the last 2 decades on a consumer. They change their habits briefly, and then beer comes back. To take the giant recessionary years, some of beer's best years. So we're all living, I guess the point would be, we're all living the shock moment. Consumers will get used to the shock, and they'll go back to their beer habits.
I think that is a great insight, and I think you're absolutely right. That's really the only thing that's new. And people always talk, oh, cannabis. I'm like, the illicit market has always been there. So really, there's the comps. Cannabis. Most of it's bought illegally, so we don't even know. But yeah, I think just the shock to the system. I mean, hell, Bud Light came back. I mean, things do kind of revert to the mean in the long term. So you know what? Some words of hope.
Yeah, great insight, Bill. I love that.
Words of hope from Bill
Let's
Kirk.
see. In summer 2025, Bump again said Constellation got more shelf space this year than last year. So if that consumer settles, right, just that shock goes away, and you have more shelf space gained in 2025 than 2024, that's a big summer for Constellation. Two ifs, absolutely two ifs, but that's a good setup to have all that extra shelf space for that, ready for that moment for the consumer, maybe just to stabilize.
All right. Good times. Well, listen, I'd love to sit here and just bullshit with you people all day long. You know I'd love it. But, however, we must get back to work because investors depend on us, our readers depend on us, the brewers, the distributors, some retailers. Had dinner with a retailer last week. He said reads it every morning, loves it. Big retailer. I'm not going to say who, but big. We're talking big. So anyway, y'all have a great week, and we'll catch you back here next week on Beer Net Radio.
Cheers.